Your brain is lying to you right now and you do not even know it. Scientists have spent decades tricking normal, everyday Americans into believing rubber hands were real, missing a full-grown gorilla in plain sight, and feeling two marbles when there is only one. These were not idiots. These were regular people just like you sitting in a lab, getting absolutely humiliated by their own skull. If you think your brain has got your back, buckle up, because it absolutely does not. Or smash that like button, subscribe, and let us expose every ridiculous way your brain makes a complete fool out of you every single day. 1. Most people think they notice everything happening right in front of them, but a famous Harvard experiment proved otherwise. Researchers asked volunteers to watch a video and count basketball passes between players. While they were busy counting, a person dressed in a full gorilla suit walked straight through the middle of the scene, beat their chest, and casually strolled off. More than half the volunteers missed it completely. When told about the gorilla afterward, most refused to believe it. Their brains were so locked in on one task that an entire gorilla became invisible. 2. Scientists in the 90s pulled off one of the weirdest tricks ever done in a laboratory. They hid a person's real hand under a table, placed a fake rubber hand right in front of them, then stroked both hands at the exact same time with a small brush. Within just a few minutes, volunteers started feeling the rubber hand as their actual hand. When researchers suddenly stabbed the fake hand with a needle, people genuinely flinched and yanked their real hidden hand away in pain. Their brain had fully adopted a chunk of rubber as living flesh. 3. Researchers once pulled off the most disrespectful experiment in human history by swapping a person mid-conversation, and most people never even noticed. A stranger would stop someone on campus to ask for directions, and while they were talking, workers carrying a large door would pass between them, secretly replacing the original stranger with a completely different person. The new person continued the conversation like nothing happened, so over 50% of people just kept giving directions to a totally different human being standing in front of them without blinking once. 4. A group of patients walked into a hospital, took a sugar pill, and somehow felt their pain completely disappear. Researchers gave people fake painkillers with zero actual medicine inside and told them it would help. Those patients reported the exact same pain relief as people taking real medication. Their brains simply believed the pill was working and then made it actually work. The human brain is so gullible, it will manufacture real physical relief from a piece of candy just because someone in a white coat handed it over with confidence. 5. Researchers once convinced perfectly normal adults that they had been lost inside a shopping mall as children. And those adults not only believed it, but started adding extra details to the fake memory themselves. These scientists simply asked leading questions across a few sessions and planted the false story carefully. Within weeks, people were describing what they wore, how scared they felt, and which stores they walked past during an event that never happened even once in their entire life. Your memory is not a recording. It is a creative writing project. 6. An ordinary American man sat in a room with a scientist telling him to press a button and deliver electric shocks to a stranger in the next room. The stranger screamed, begged, and pleaded for it to stop. The scientist just calmly said, "Please continue." A shocking 65% of regular everyday people kept pressing that button all the way to the maximum voltage level, just because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to keep going. Stanley Milgram proved that most humans will do genuinely terrible things simply because someone official-sounding asked nicely. 7. Before a handsome person even opened their mouth in a room full of strangers, everyone had already decided he was smarter, kinder, funnier, and more competent than everyone else sitting there. Researchers ran tests where attractive people were rated higher on every single personality trait before saying a single word or doing a single thing. This is called the halo effect, and it means your brain looks at a pretty face and just automatically assumes the whole package is premium quality. Ugly people everywhere have been fighting this unfair brain glitch their entire professional lives. 8. A group of wine experts swirled their glasses, sniffed deeply, and confidently declared a particular bottle one of the finest they had ever tasted. Researchers had secretly poured a cheap bargain wine into an expensive luxury bottle right before serving it. The price tag alone completely rewired how those experts experienced every single sip. Their brains tasted the label instead of the liquid. The same cheap wine served in its original bottle got completely trashed by those same experts in the same session. Your taste buds are basically just reading price stickers. 9. Try reading the word red when it is printed in blue ink, and your brain will immediately start arguing with itself like two people fighting over a television remote. Psychologist John Ridley Stroop discovered that your brain processes word meaning and ink color at the exact same time, and those two signals crash directly into each other. Something as simple as mismatched colors and words creates a genuine traffic jam inside your skull. Thousands of people have sat in labs staring at colored words and getting completely humiliated by something a kindergartner could put together with crayons. 10. A researcher handed volunteers a pencil and told them to hold it horizontally between their teeth, which forced their face into something resembling a smile without them realizing it. Those people then rated a series of cartoons as significantly funnier than people who held the pencil with their lips, which prevented smiling entirely. Their faces were tricked into a smile position, and their brains immediately decided everything was more hilarious because of it. See, Gary Ladd would be devastated to learn that half his audience might only be laughing because of jaw positioning and not actual comedy talent. 11. In New York City, a man collapsed on a busy sidewalk surrounded by dozens of people walking past, and almost nobody stopped to help him. Researchers staged this exact scenario repeatedly and discovered something deeply uncomfortable about human nature. The more people present during an emergency, the less likely anyone is to do anything at all. Everyone assumed someone else would handle it. This brain glitch is called the bystander effect, and it basically means that in a crowded American city you could be dramatically dying on the pavement while hundreds of people walk past assuming it is somebody else's problem entirely. 12. Without realizing it, a woman sitting across from a researcher started copying his leg cross, his chin scratch, and his slouched posture within just minutes of conversation starting. And scientists discovered that humans automatically and unconsciously mimic the body language, gestures, and facial expressions of whoever they are talking to. The wildest part is that the people being mimicked liked the mimicker significantly more without knowing why. Your body is out here running a secret social charm operation completely behind your back, and your brain never once sends you a memo about any of it happening. 13. A scientist played the sound "ba" through speakers while simultaneously showing video of lips clearly saying "fi," and the volunteers sitting in that lab heard something completely different from both. Their brains combined the mismatched audio and visual information and manufactured an entirely new sound that did not exist in either source. This is called the McGurk effect, and it means your eyes are secretly overriding your ears every single moment of your life. You think you are hearing the world, but you are actually watching it and letting your eyeballs write the soundtrack without your permission. 14. Researchers asked one group of Americans whether Gandhi died before or after age 9, and asked another group whether he died before or after age 140. The group given the low number guessed Gandhi died much younger than the group given the ridiculously high number, even though both numbers were obviously wrong. The very first number dropped into your brain grabs the steering wheel and refuses to let go no matter how irrational it clearly is. This is called anchoring bias, and car salesmen, real estate agents, and every pricing department in America has been exploiting it against you for decades. 15. Philosophers handed Americans a classic moral puzzle where pulling a lever would divert a runaway trolley and save 5 people but kill 1 person on the other track. Most people said yes, pull the lever. Then researchers changed it slightly and asked if they would physically push a large man off a bridge to stop the trolley and save the same 5 lives. Suddenly, almost everyone said absolutely not, even though the math is completely identical both ways. Your brain runs a totally different emotional calculation the moment your hands get personally involved, and no amount of logic fixes that glitch. 16. Researchers told volunteers to watch 2 photos carefully because something was going to visibly change right in front of their eyes. Even with that specific warning sitting fresh in their minds, most people completely missed obvious differences appearing during slow transitions between images. A person's hat disappeared. An entire barn vanished from a field. Nobody caught it. Scientists call this change blindness, and it proves that your brain is not actually recording reality like a camera. It is making lazy assumptions and filling enormous gaps with whatever it already expects to see sitting there. 17. A game show host shows you 3 doors and tells you a car is behind one of them. You pick door 1. He opens door 3, revealing nothing, and asks if you want to switch to door 2. Almost every American instinctively says it does not matter and stays put. They are completely wrong. So switching actually doubles your probability of winning, and the math has been proven exhaustively. When this solution was published in a national magazine, thousands of readers, including mathematics professors, sent furious letters insisting the answer was wrong. Your brain hates this problem and will fight the correct answer like it personally offended your family. 18. Police investigators showed the same car crash footage to a room full of witnesses and then asked some of them how fast the cars were going when they hit each other and asked others how fast they were going when they smashed into each other. The smashed group consistently estimated dramatically higher speeds than the hit group, even though they watched the exact same video. One single word, swapped in a question, completely rewrote what people genuinely believed they had seen with their own eyes. Elizabeth Loftus proved that eyewitness testimony is basically just a very confident story your brain improvised after the fact. 19. Casino dealers stared at real roulette data and watched something deeply embarrassing happen at their tables every single night. After the ball landed on red 5 times in a row, players all over the floor started furiously betting on black because they felt black was now due to happen. See, every single spin of that wheel is a completely fresh and independent 50-50 chance with zero memory of what came before it. The wheel does not get tired of red. It does not owe black anything. But human brains walked into those casinos convinced the universe keeps score and bet their rent money on it. 20. A woman is sitting in a loud and packed American sports bar where the noise is absolutely deafening on every side of her. Her brain is somehow filtering all of it out perfectly so she can follow her own conversation. Then somebody 15 feet away casually mentions her name to someone else, and her ears lock onto it instantly like a heat-seeking missile cutting through every layer of noise in that room. Scientists call this the cocktail party effect, and it means your brain is secretly scanning every conversation happening around you simultaneously without ever telling you it is doing that surveillance work. 21. Researchers handed volunteers a pile of scrambled word puzzles containing hidden words like slow, ancient, wrinkled, and retired buried inside innocent-looking sentences. After finishing the puzzles, the volunteers got up and walked down the hallway toward the elevator. Scientists secretly timed every single one of them. The people who unscrambled sentences loaded with old-age words walked measurably and significantly slower down that hallway than everyone else without having any idea why their legs were moving differently. Words they read 5 minutes ago were quietly reprogramming their physical body in real time, and their conscious brain never received a single notification about it. 22. A man paid $14 for a movie ticket, sat down, and within the first 20 minutes realized the film was genuinely one of the worst things he had ever witnessed in his entire life. He stayed for the full 2 hours anyway. Researchers studying this exact behavior found that people consistently keep suffering through terrible movies, bad meals, and miserable vacations simply because they already spent money on them. Leaving would save time and end the misery immediately, but the brain absolutely refuses to abandon something it already paid for. Economists call this the sunk cost fallacy, and Hollywood has been accidentally benefiting from it for a century. 23. A music teacher spent years mastering a complicated piano piece and then tried to help a beginner student understand it by tapping the rhythm on a table. The teacher was completely convinced the student would recognize the melody immediately. The student heard nothing but random tapping. Researchers studied this gap and discovered that once your brain truly knows something deeply, it physically cannot remember what it felt like to not know it. Experts wildly overestimate how much their explanation communicates to beginners every single time. This is called the curse of knowledge, and it is why half of all tutorial videos on YouTube are completely useless to actual beginners. 24. A volunteer plunged their left hand into a bucket of hot water and their right hand into a bucket of ice-cold water and held them there for 60 seconds. Then they moved both hands simultaneously into a single bucket of perfectly lukewarm water sitting in the middle. Their left hand screamed that the water was freezing cold. Their right hand screamed that the exact same water was burning hot. Same bucket, same water, same temperature, or two completely opposite physical sensations happening to one person at the exact same moment. Your nervous system is not measuring reality. It is just comparing whatever came before and reporting the difference. 25. Researchers gave a room full of Americans a fairly difficult test covering logic, grammar, and general reasoning skills, then asked everyone to estimate how well they personally performed. Cite the people who scored in the absolute bottom 10% of the entire room confidently estimated they had scored in the top half. The people who actually scored highest were the most uncertain about their performance. David Dunning and Justin Kruger published this finding and proved that incompetence comes with a built-in bonus feature where you are too unskilled to even recognize how unskilled you genuinely are. Confidence and ability turned out to be running in completely opposite directions. 26. A hospital in Boston presented the exact same surgical procedure to two different groups of patients using slightly different language. The first group was told the surgery had a 90% survival rate. The second group was told the same surgery had a 10% death rate. Those are mathematically identical statements containing the exact same information. The first group overwhelmingly chose to proceed with surgery while the second group hesitated and refused at dramatically higher rates. Researchers proved that the human brain does not process facts, it processes packaging. How information gets wrapped determines the decision far more than the actual information sitting inside it. 27. Scientists flashed photographs of completely random human faces on a screen so briefly that volunteers consciously registered almost nothing at all. Days later, those same faces were mixed into a larger collection, and volunteers were asked to rate which ones they found most attractive. Consistently and repeatedly, they rated the briefly flashed faces as more attractive than the faces they were seeing for the very first time. They had zero conscious memory of the earlier exposure, but their brains had quietly filed those faces under familiar and safe. So familiarity was being silently converted into attractiveness without a single moment of awareness happening anywhere in the process. 28. Stanford University recruited perfectly normal college students, flipped a coin, and randomly assigned half of them to be prison guards and the other half to be prisoners inside a fake jail built in a basement. Within just 2 days, the guards started genuinely abusing their power, humiliating inmates, and creating punishment systems nobody asked them to create. The prisoners had emotional breakdowns and begged to leave. Philip Zimbardo had to shut the entire experiment down after only 6 days because real human cruelty had emerged from absolutely nothing but a random coin flip and a costume. Regular American students dissolved into monsters faster than a weekend. 29. A researcher handed a volunteer 2 boxes and asked them to pick up both. One box was small and dense. The other was large and light. Both boxes weighed exactly the same amount measured on a precise scale. Without exception, every single volunteer reported that the small box felt dramatically heavier than the large one. Your brain looks at the size of an object before your hands even touch it and pre-calculates an expected weight. When reality does not match that prediction, your nervous system reports the wrong answer anyway. And scientists call this the size-weight illusion, and your brain has been filing incorrect weight reports your entire life without apology. 30. Researchers designed one of the most uncomfortable experiments in psychology by making volunteers hold their hand in painfully cold water for 2 separate sessions. The first session lasted 60 seconds of pure misery. The second session lasted 60 seconds of the same misery followed by 30 additional seconds of slightly less cold water. Objectively, the second session was longer and contained more total pain. When asked which session they would repeat, most people chose the second longer one simply because it ended on a slightly less terrible note. Daniel Kahneman proved that your brain does not calculate total suffering. It just remembers the ending and files its review based entirely on that. 31. Researchers sat volunteers down and showed them footage of a car accident, then casually asked afterward whether they noticed the broken headlight in the video. There was no broken headlight anywhere in that footage. It did not exist even for a single frame. But a significant number of volunteers later confidently reported remembering seeing it clearly during the video. Scientists had planted a fake detail inside a simple question, and that detail burrowed straight into memory and became real. Elizabeth Loftus proved that your memory does not store what happened. It stores what you were told happened and then presents it back to you with complete confidence. 32. A restaurant owner added one outrageously overpriced $45 pasta dish to the top of his menu, and watched something fascinating happen to his sales numbers immediately. Nobody ordered the $45 pasta. But sales of the $28 salmon dish exploded overnight because it suddenly looked like the reasonable and smart choice sitting next to something absurd. Researchers studying this confirmed that adding an obviously bad option to any set of choices makes the second most expensive option feel like a bargain. Your brain discovered all by itself. Every pricing menu at every restaurant chain in America is quietly running this exact trick on you right now. 33. A group of volunteers spent a morning doing genuinely good deeds like donating to charity and signing environmental petitions, feeling fantastic about themselves afterward. Researchers then gave those same people opportunities to cheat, lie, and behave selfishly later that same afternoon. The people who did good things in the morning cheated at significantly higher rates than people who had done nothing virtuous at all. Their brains had issued themselves a moral credit card earlier in the day and were now spending freely from it. Scientists call this moral licensing, and it explains why some of the most publicly charitable people in America behave terribly when nobody is watching. 34. Police departments across America rely heavily on eyewitness descriptions, but researchers discovered something deeply inconvenient about that practice in a laboratory setting. Volunteers watched a face carefully for several minutes, then were immediately asked to write a detailed verbal description of what they saw. When those same volunteers later attempted to identify the face in a lineup, they performed significantly worse than people who had written nothing at all. Describing the face in words had quietly overwritten and corrupted the original visual memory sitting in their brain. Talking about what you remember actually damages the memory itself, and law enforcement has been accidentally exploiting this brain glitch for decades. 35. A furniture company handed volunteers a flat-pack box of shelves and instructed them to assemble the whole thing themselves using only the provided tools and a confusing diagram. When finished, those volunteers were asked how much they would sell their assembled shelf for, and they demanded dramatically more money than volunteers who were handed an identical pre-assembled shelf of clearly superior quality. Their wobbly, slightly crooked, personally built shelf felt more valuable simply because their own hands had touched it. Researchers named this the IKEA effect, and it proves that human beings assign completely irrational value to anything they personally create, regardless of how objectively terrible the result actually turned out. 36. A college student walked into his morning lecture with a small coffee stain on the front of his shirt that he had noticed while brushing his teeth. He spent the entire class convinced that every single person in that room had spotted it and was silently judging him for it. Researchers studying this phenomenon asked stained shirt volunteers to estimate how many people noticed and then actually counted. Only about 25% of people in the room had seen anything at all. Why your brain casts itself as the permanent star of a movie that literally nobody else in the room is watching or has any interest in attending. 37. A psychology professor drew two perfectly identical horizontal lines on a whiteboard and added small arrow tips pointing outward on the ends of one line and small arrow tips pointing inward on the ends of the other. Every single student in the room immediately and confidently declared the lines were different lengths, despite having just watched them get drawn identically with the same marker in the same motion. The professor then measured both lines directly in front of the class, proving they were equal. Students stared at the ruler and still felt the lines looked different. The Mueller-Lyer illusion has been humiliating humans since 1889, and knowing about it does not help you escape it even slightly. 38. Researchers handed Americans a survey asking them to estimate what percentage of other Americans shared their personal opinions on topics like politics, food preferences, and lifestyle choices. Every single group dramatically overestimated how many other people agreed with them on nearly every question asked. People who preferred staying home on weekends assumed most Americans felt the same way. And people with strong political views assumed their position was the obvious majority one. Scientists call this the false consensus effect, and it means your brain has been quietly convincing you that your personal experience of the world is basically the default setting that everyone else is also running. 39. A researcher set up 2 jam tasting tables at an upscale California grocery store on alternating days. One table offered 24 different jam varieties to passing shoppers, while the other table offered only 6. The table with 24 jams attracted significantly more curious visitors who stopped to look. But the table with only 6 jams generated 10 times more actual purchases. Too many options caused shoppers to freeze completely, feel overwhelmed, and walk away buying absolutely nothing. Psychologist Barry Schwartz confirmed that abundance of choice feels liberating right up until the moment your brain shuts down entirely and picks the emergency exit instead of any jam at all. 40. A word sits somewhere in your brain right now, and you are 100% certain you know it. You can feel its shape, sense how many syllables it has, almost hear how it starts, and picture exactly when you last used it. But your brain is flatly refusing to produce it no matter how hard you concentrate or how many times you circle back around to try again. Researchers studying this confirmed that you can genuinely possess knowledge your own brain will not hand over on demand. Scientists call it the tip-of-the-tongue phenomenon, and it is your brain's way of proving it is the one actually in charge of this whole operation. 41. A psychologist handed the same generic personality description to every single person in a university classroom and asked each student to rate how accurately it described them personally. The description said things like, "You have a great need for people to like you, you have a tendency to be critical of yourself, and you have a lot of unused potential." Nearly every student rated it as an eerily accurate and deeply personal portrait of their unique individual personality. Every single person received the exact same paragraph. Psychologists call this the Barnum effect, and it is the entire scientific reason why horoscopes, personality quizzes, and psychic hotlines have been successfully stealing American money for generations. 42. Researchers gathered a room of liberals and a room of conservatives and presented both groups with the exact same collection of mixed scientific evidence on a controversial policy topic. Both groups studied the identical data packet containing the same charts, statistics, and research findings. Liberals walked away more convinced than ever that the evidence supported the liberal position. Conservatives walked away more convinced than ever that the exact same evidence supported the conservative position. Neither group noticed any contradiction whatsoever. Scientists call this confirmation bias, and it means your brain is not actually evaluating evidence at all. It is running a search operation exclusively for anything that already agrees with what you decided before you walked in. 43. A veteran returned from combat. Having lost his arm below the elbow and began experiencing excruciating pain in a hand that was no longer physically attached to his body. Doctors were baffled because there was simply nothing there to hurt. A neurologist, Vilayanur Ramachandran, discovered that the brain maintains a complete internal body map so detailed and so stubborn that it keeps sending pain signals to missing limbs for years after amputation. The arm was gone, but the brain had not updated its records and refused to accept the paperwork. Your brain is running such a detailed simulation of your body that it will generate real agony in body parts that have not existed for decades. 44. Our researchers showed 2 abstract shapes to people from dozens of completely different countries, speaking entirely different languages who had never met or communicated with each other. One shape was sharp and jagged with aggressive pointed edges. The other was soft, round, and blobby. They asked everyone which shape was called booba and which was called kiki. Across every single culture tested, an overwhelming 95% of people assigned kiki to the sharp shape and booba to the round one without any hesitation. Nobody taught them this. No language connected these sounds to these shapes. Your brain arrives pre-wired with connections between certain sounds and certain visual forms before experience teaches it anything at all. 45. Researchers at the University of Minnesota handed one group of volunteers a stack of real cash to hold and handed another group plain sheets of blank paper cut to the same size. Then both groups were asked to submerge their hands in painfully hot water and report their discomfort levels. The people holding real money consistently reported feeling significantly less pain than the people holding worthless blank paper. Nobody spent the money. Nobody was promised anything. Simply touching cash was enough to physically dull the sensation of pain registering in their nervous system. Your brain treats money as such a powerful resource that merely holding it activates genuine biological pain relief circuits. 46. A group of unsuspecting office workers stepped into an elevator, where every other passenger was secretly a researcher, deliberately standing and facing the wrong wall instead of the doors. Without a single word being spoken, or without any instruction or social pressure being applied openly, every new person who entered that elevator quietly turned around and faced the wrong wall alongside everyone else within seconds of arriving. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked confused. They just silently obeyed the group arrangement like it was the most natural thing in the world. Solomon Ash's colleagues proved that humans will physically reorient themselves in space just to avoid being the only person in a small room doing something differently. 47. After a commercial airplane crash made national headlines, researchers went out and asked Americans to estimate the probability of dying in a plane crash versus dying in a car crash over the next year. People consistently and dramatically overestimated the plane crash risk, despite the fact that cars kill vastly more Americans every single year without interruption. The plane crash was vivid, recent, and emotionally unforgettable, while car deaths happen quietly every day without breaking news coverage. Your brain measures probability not by calculating actual statistics, but by asking itself how easily it can picture something terrible happening, and then presenting that feeling as factual risk assessment data. 48. A university professor stopped students on campus and asked them to explain in complete detail exactly how a zipper works. Most students said sure, smiled confidently, and then opened their mouths and produced almost nothing coherent whatsoever. They knew zippers worked. They had used zippers every single day of their lives, but the moment they attempted a real step-by-step mechanical explanation, they discovered a vast and embarrassing void where understanding was supposed to be sitting. Researchers call this the illusion of explanatory depth, and it means most Americans are walking around with supreme confidence about how toilets, car engines, and democratic voting systems function while actually having almost no real idea at all. 49. Researchers gathered teams of American college students together, assigned them group projects, and then when everything was finished, asked each individual team member to privately estimate what percentage of the total work they personally contributed. When the researchers added up all the individual estimates from every member of every single team, the totals consistently came out well above 100%. Every person genuinely believed they had carried more than their fair share of the load. Nobody was lying deliberately. Everyone was experiencing the same brain glitch that makes your own contributions glow brightly in memory, while quietly dimming the contributions of everyone working alongside you at the exact same time. 50. Neuroscientists slid volunteers into brain scanning machines and showed them photographs of themselves as they currently look today, followed by photographs of themselves digitally aged to show how they would appear in old age. The brain activity triggered by the current self-photographs was warm, familiar, and deeply personal. The brain activity triggered by the aged future self-photographs was identical to the activity triggered by photographs of complete strangers the volunteers had never met. Your own brain does not recognize the future version of you as you at all. It categorizes your 60-year-old self as somebody else entirely, which explains beautifully why saving for retirement feels exactly as urgent as buying a gift for a random person you will never meet. 51. A Texas family climbed into their car on a sweltering summer afternoon and drove 53 miles to a dusty cafeteria in Abilene that nobody particularly wanted to visit. When they finally returned home exhausted and miserable, each family member admitted they had only agreed to go because they assumed everyone else wanted to. Nobody actually wanted to go. The entire trip was manufactured by a group of people all silently deferring to a desire that existed in nobody's head. Management professor Jerry Harvey named this the Abilene Paradox, and it explains why American office meetings regularly produce unanimous decisions that every single person in the room privately thinks is absolutely terrible. 52. A researcher handed a volunteer a small marble and asked them to roll it back and forth between two fingers while their fingers were secretly crossed underneath a table. And the volunteer immediately reported feeling two separate marbles rolling around despite holding only one single marble in their actual hand. Their crossed fingers sent the brain spatial information from an impossible angle, and the brain had absolutely no framework for processing it correctly. So it simply invented a second marble and reported that instead. Your brain is supposed to be your most reliable sense-making organ, and it responded to two crossed fingers by confidently manufacturing an entire fictional object. 53. Statisticians analyzing marriage records, city population databases, and professional licensing registries across multiple American states discovered something deeply weird buried in the numbers. People named Dennis were statistically overrepresented among dentists. People named Lawrence showed up in law firms at above-average rates. People with names beginning with certain letters clustered in cities sharing those same letters at rates well above random chance. No conspiracy was involved. No conscious decision was being made by anyone. Your brain runs a quiet background preference for things resembling yourself so persistently that it nudges major life decisions like career and home city toward whatever already shares your initials. 54. A volunteer plunged their hand into a bucket of painfully cold water and held it there for 60 agonizing seconds, then pulled it out. In the second session, they submerged the same hand for 60 seconds of identical pain, followed by 30 extra seconds of slightly less cold water, making the total experience objectively longer and containing more accumulated suffering overall. When asked which session they would be willing to repeat, most volunteers chose the second longer one without hesitation, simply because it ended on a marginally less awful note. Daniel Kahneman proved your brain completely ignores duration when scoring painful experiences, and writes the entire review based almost exclusively on how the last few seconds felt. 55. Researchers gathered a large group of Americans and asked them to predict the outcomes of various upcoming political elections, sporting events, and economic decisions before any results were known. Everyone wrote down their honest predictions on paper. Months later, after all the outcomes had been revealed, researchers returned to those same people and asked them to recall what they had originally predicted. An overwhelming majority of people confidently misremembered their original guesses as having been much closer to the actual outcomes than their written predictions proved they actually were. Your brain quietly rewrites your prediction history the moment results arrive, so you always remember yourself as having basically seen it coming all along. 56. Researchers set up a laboratory table with various objects sitting on it and asked volunteers to sit down and perform a simple task involving mild electric shocks. On some sessions, a gun was casually placed on the corner of the table, as if someone had simply left it there. Nobody mentioned the weapon. Nobody referenced it in any instructions. The volunteers who sat at the table with the gun present consistently administered significantly higher levels of electric shock than volunteers who sat at a table with no weapon present at all. A single object that no one discussed, touched, or acknowledged managed to make ordinary Americans measurably more aggressive just by silently sitting there in their peripheral vision. 57. Researchers surveyed thousands of ordinary Americans and asked them to honestly estimate their personal likelihood of experiencing various negative life events, including divorce, serious car accidents, cancer diagnosis, and job loss, compared to the average American their age. An extraordinary and statistically impossible percentage of people rated themselves as significantly less likely than average to experience every single bad outcome on the entire list. And if everyone is below average risk, then the math has completely collapsed, but human brains do not care about math when personal safety feels involved. Scientists call this the optimism bias, and it is the reason Americans buy lottery tickets, skip sunscreen, and consistently underestimate how badly things can go. 58. A graduate student made a to-do list on Monday morning containing 12 tasks she needed to complete before Friday. By Wednesday, she had finished 8 of them and was feeling genuinely productive and satisfied. But the 4 unfinished tasks kept invading her thoughts during dinner, interrupting her sleep, and ambushing her in the shower every single morning. The 8 completed tasks produced almost no mental chatter whatsoever. Russian psychologist Bluma Zygarnik documented this exact phenomenon and discovered your brain treats unfinished business as an open loop it cannot stop obsessively returning to. Completed tasks get filed away immediately. Incomplete ones get a permanent office inside your head and refuse to stop sending memos. 59. A classroom of American students was given a series of straightforward math problems and asked to write down their answers confidently. When students had committed to their answers, a researcher in a white lab coat entered the room, pointed at specific problems, and calmly stated that a leading mathematics expert had reviewed those answers and strongly disagreed with several of them. Students who had answered correctly began erasing their right answers and replacing them with wrong ones simply because an authority figure expressed disapproval. Nobody presented alternative calculations. Nobody explained what the correct answer supposedly was. A lab coat and a confident tone of voice was entirely sufficient to make Americans doubt math they had solved correctly with their own pencils. 60. Facebook data scientists ran a secret experiment in 2012 where they quietly adjusted the news feeds of nearly 700,000 users to show them more negative and emotionally distressing content than usual without informing a single one of them. Those users subsequently began posting significantly more negative content themselves in the days that followed. Their moods had been surgically altered by an algorithm they could not see operating on content they assumed was arriving randomly. When the study was published publicly, the backlash was enormous, but the finding was already out there. Your emotional state on any given day is quietly being curated and adjusted by platforms that have known exactly how to do this for over a decade. 61. Volunteers strapped on virtual reality headsets and were given the perspective of looking out through a completely different body than their own. Within just a few minutes, people began adopting the posture, mannerisms, and even personality traits associated with their new virtual body. Their brain accepted the foreign body as home faster than most Americans accept a new couch. Your sense of self is so fragile that a cheap headset and some software can completely reassign it in under 5 minutes. 62. Researchers showed volunteers an endless slideshow of impossibly cute baby animals, including chubby puppies, tiny hedgehogs, and miniature ducklings. Instead of simply feeling warm and fuzzy, a significant portion of volunteers reported an overwhelming urge to squeeze those animals aggressively. The scientists confirmed this is a real neurological phenomenon, where extreme cuteness overloads the brain's emotional circuits so completely that it spills over into physical aggression as a release valve. Your brain genuinely cannot handle maximum cuteness without reaching for something to violently squeeze in response. 63. Researchers asked older Americans to sit down and freely recall their most vivid and meaningful personal memories from across their entire lifetime. Instead of memories spreading evenly across all life stages, a disproportionate avalanche of memories came flooding out from the period between ages 15 and 25. First concerts, first heartbreaks, first road trips, first real friendships. Your brain treats that specific window of life as the most cinematically significant era you will ever live through, and quietly archives everything else at a dramatically lower resolution by comparison. 64. Researchers asked Americans to rate how common their own positive qualities were compared to the general population. People consistently believed their kindness, creativity, and intelligence were rarer and more special than average, while simultaneously believing their personal flaws and bad habits were completely ordinary and shared by basically everyone. Your brain runs a custom double standard where your good qualities get filed under unique and exceptional, while your embarrassing qualities get filed under totally normal and universal. It is the most flattering filing system imaginable, and it operates completely without your knowledge. 65. A supermarket manager in a New Jersey store piped slow classical music through the overhead speakers one week and fast upbeat music the following week, then quietly tracked every customer's spending. E-shoppers moving through slow music aisles walked measurably slower, lingered longer, and spent significantly more money per visit than the fast music group. Nobody reported noticing the music influencing their behavior at all. Researchers confirmed this effect across multiple stores. The background music your brain barely registers is actively slowing your feet, extending your visit, and systematically emptying your wallet without triggering a single conscious alarm. 66. Psychologists ran an experiment where they casually reminded one group of volunteers about their own inevitable death before asking both groups to evaluate essays written by people from different cultural backgrounds. The death reminder group gave dramatically harsher ratings to essays by foreign authors and dramatically warmer ratings to essays by authors sharing their own cultural background. On simply thinking about dying for 30 seconds turned ordinary Americans into significantly more tribal, aggressive, and culturally defensive versions of themselves almost instantly. Scientists call this terror management theory, and it explains an uncomfortable amount of political behavior happening across America every single election cycle. 67. Researchers handed one group of volunteers a 7-digit number to memorize, and handed another group a 2-digit number, then walked both groups down a hallway where someone offered them a choice between chocolate cake and fruit salad. The 7-digit group chose chocolate cake at dramatically higher rates than the 2-digit group. Their brains were burning so much mental energy holding that longer number in working memory that their impulse control quietly collapsed under the pressure. Your willpower and your memory are drawing from the exact same limited cognitive fuel tank, and they compete against each other every single day without telling you. 68. Pick any ordinary word, say it out loud 50 times in a row without stopping, and something deeply unsettling begins happening around repetition 30. The word starts sounding strange, then stranger, then completely alien and meaningless. By repetition 50, it has transformed into a collection of random sounds with no connection to meaning whatsoever. Scientists call this semantic satiation, and it happens because your brain's connection between a sound and its meaning is not permanent hardwiring. It is more like a phone battery that drains completely if you run the same app too aggressively for too long. 69. Researchers photographed an average-looking man and then placed him in 2 different photos. Seen in one photo, he stood completely alone. In the second photo, he stood next to someone significantly less attractive. The exact same face with 0 alterations was consistently rated as noticeably more attractive in the second photo, purely because of who was standing nearby. Your brain never rates anything on an absolute scale. It always measures relatively against whatever surrounds the target. This is why every stylish restaurant in America puts its medium-priced dish right next to the most expensive one on the menu. 70. Researchers handed volunteers a sugar pill and told one group it might cause headaches, nausea, and fatigue as side effects. The other group received the identical sugar pill with no warnings attached. The warned group reported significantly more headaches, more nausea, and more fatigue than the group that was told nothing negative at all. Zero medicine was involved in either case. Negative expectations manufactured genuine physical symptoms in real human bodies from absolutely nothing but words and anticipation. Scientists call this the nocebo effect, and it is the evil twin of the placebo, and it proves your brain will make you genuinely sick if you expect it hard enough. 71. A researcher rode a unicycle through the main plaza of a busy American university campus, dressed in a full clown costume during peak foot traffic hours. Hidden observers recorded exactly who noticed and who did not. Only 25% of people walking while talking on their phones looked up long enough to register a literal clown on a unicycle rolling past them in broad daylight. The other 75% walked straight past without seeing anything unusual at all. Scientists confirmed that active phone conversation consumes enough brain attention to make a circus performer completely invisible to the human eye. 72. Researchers asked volunteers to make moral judgments about various ethical dilemmas while secretly positioning some of them near a trash can, emitting a foul, rotten smell. The bad smell group consistently delivered harsher and more severe moral verdicts than the group sitting in fresh air, making identical judgments. So physical disgust and moral disgust share the exact same neural circuitry inside your brain and cannot tell each other apart. A garbage smell made ordinary Americans significantly more judgmental about unrelated ethical situations, purely because their nose sent the wrong signal to the wrong department and nobody inside caught the error. 73. A university fraternity made new members crawl through mud, endure sleep deprivation, and suffer through a week of humiliating public rituals before granting them full membership. Researchers studying multiple groups found that members who underwent the most brutal initiations consistently rated their fraternity as the most valuable, meaningful, and enjoyable group on campus. Members who joined with minimal hazing rated their groups far less enthusiastically. Your brain cannot accept that you suffered for something worthless, so it quietly inflates the value of whatever caused the suffering. The harder the entry, the more your brain insists the destination must have been worth every bit of it. 74. Princeton researchers printed 2 versions of the exact same factual statement and handed them to separate groups of volunteers. One version was printed in a clean, crisp, easy-to-read font. The other contained the identical words printed in a small, fuzzy, difficult-to-read typeface. Volunteers consistently rated the clearly printed statement as more truthful and credible than the hard-to-read version. Their brains interpreted the physical struggle of processing difficult text as a signal that something about the content itself was suspicious or unreliable. Readable fonts feel honest. Difficult fonts feel dishonest. Your brain is out here making credibility judgments based entirely on typography choices. 75. 8. Completely sane and psychologically healthy volunteers, including David Rosenhan himself, walked into separate psychiatric hospitals across America and reported hearing a single voice saying the words empty, hollow, and thud. Every single one was admitted immediately and diagnosed with serious mental illness. Once inside, they behaved completely normally and reported feeling fine. Staff interpreted their note-taking as a symptom of their condition. Their normal behavior was reframed as further evidence of illness. It took an average of 19 days to get released. Rosenhan proved that once a label gets attached to a person inside an institution, everything that person does gets filtered through that label automatically. 76. Researchers flashed a series of words on a screen and asked volunteers to simply identify the color of ink. Each word was printed in as quickly as possible. When the words were neutral, like table or chair, the task was easy and fast. When the words were emotionally charged like death, failure, cancer, or worthless, the volunteers slowed down dramatically and made significantly more errors, even though the task itself had not changed at all. And the emotional weight of a word hijacked the basic color recognition process running simultaneously in the same brain. Heavy words physically slowed a task that had absolutely nothing to do with their meaning. 77. An energy company mailed households a report showing their monthly electricity usage alongside their neighbors' average consumption. Households using more than their neighbors reduced their usage significantly after seeing the comparison. But households already using less than their neighbors actually increased their consumption after seeing the report to bring themselves closer to the group average. Researchers had to add a small smiley face to the bottom of low usage reports to stop efficient households from voluntarily increasing their bills just to fit in with the neighborhood norm. Without the smiley face, being more efficient than average felt socially uncomfortable enough to correct upward. 78. Researchers showed expert chess grandmasters and complete beginners a chessboard with pieces arranged in a random nonsensical pattern that would never occur in any real game. When asked to memorize and recreate the layout, the grandmasters performed no better than the absolute beginners despite decades of accumulated expertise. But when researchers showed both groups boards with pieces arranged in real strategic game positions, the grandmasters reconstructed them with breathtaking accuracy, while beginners remembered almost nothing. Expert memory is not general superiority. It is a highly specialized pattern recognition system that completely stops working the moment the patterns stop making sense. 79. An experimenter rode an elevator holding either a warm cup of coffee or a cold iced drink, and struck up a brief conversation with each unsuspecting passenger before asking them to rate a stranger's personality from a written description. Passengers who had briefly held the warm coffee cup rated the stranger as significantly warmer, friendlier, and more generous than passengers who had been holding the cold drink during the exact same conversation reading the exact same description. See, physical temperature in your hand was silently migrating upward into your brain and rewriting your judgment of another human being's entire personality without triggering a single moment of awareness. 80. Cameras captured the facial expressions of Olympic athletes the moment they learned their final results at multiple summer games, and researchers analyzed every frame carefully afterward. Silver medalists consistently displayed more visible distress, frustration, and disappointment than bronze medalists despite finishing in an objectively superior position. Bronze medalists looked genuinely relieved and happy. Silver medalists kept mentally simulating the gold they almost won, while bronze medalists kept mentally comparing themselves to the fourth-place finisher who got nothing. Your brain does not measure success against reality. It measures success against whichever alternative outcome it finds easiest to imagine having happened instead. 81. Researchers mailed survey forms to thousands of registered American voters, asking simply whether they intended to vote in the upcoming election. No encouragement was given. No persuasion was attempted. The survey just asked the question and moved on. Voters who received that single question showed up at polling stations at measurably higher rates than voters who received no survey at all. Simply being asked about a future intention made people significantly more likely to follow through on it. And scientists confirmed that questions do not just passively measure behavior sitting in front of them. They actively reach forward in time and reshape the behavior they were supposedly only trying to observe. 82. A volunteer sat in front of a panel of randomly flashing lights and was handed a button with instructions, suggesting it might influence the pattern appearing on the screen. Yet the lights were completely random and the button was entirely disconnected from the system controlling them. Within minutes, volunteers began developing confident theories about which button press timing produced which light sequences. They started feeling genuinely responsible for patterns that were happening with zero input from them whatsoever. Your brain is so aggressively wired to find control and causation everywhere it looks that it will manufacture both completely from scratch rather than sit comfortably with the idea that something is just randomly happening. 83. Researchers showed volunteers two side-by-side photographs of human faces and asked them to point to whichever one they found more attractive. After volunteers pointed to their chosen photo, researchers used a sleight of hand technique to secretly swap the photos and handed volunteers the photo they had not chosen. Most volunteers accepted the wrong photo without noticing the switch, and then proceeded to explain in detailed and confident terms exactly why they preferred that particular face, including specific features they found especially appealing. And they were fluently and convincingly defending a choice they had never actually made, using reasons they had invented entirely on the spot. 84. A researcher asked volunteers to perform two completely different tasks. The first was a simple, well-practiced task of crossing out specific letters on a page. The second was a complex and unfamiliar task of solving a difficult anagram puzzle. Both tasks were performed first in an empty, silent room and then again in front of a live audience of observers. Every volunteer performed the simple letter task faster and more accurately with an audience watching. Every volunteer performed the complex anagram task slower and with significantly more errors under observation. Being watched supercharges performance on things you already know and systematically destroys performance on anything requiring genuine thinking. 85. College students were recruited for what they were told was a study about administrative tasks and were paid $1 to tell the next waiting participant that the task they were about to do was genuinely interesting and enjoyable. The task was spectacularly boring. After delivering their enthusiastic recommendation for $1, students were later asked to rate how much they actually enjoyed the task themselves. They rated it as significantly more enjoyable than students who were paid $20 to say the same thing. The students paid less had no financial justification for lying, so their brains simply rewrote their actual experience of the task to match what they had told somebody else. 86. A Japanese robotics researcher named Masahiro Mori spent years building increasingly human-like robots and carefully tracking how people responded to each new version. And as robots became more realistic, the positive response from observers grew steadily warmer and more comfortable. But at a specific threshold just before near-perfect human realism, something went badly wrong. Observers began reporting intense discomfort, unease, and even revulsion at robots that were almost but not quite human. A face that was 95% realistic triggered more horror than a face that was only 50% realistic. Your brain is calibrated so precisely to real human faces that something almost right reads as catastrophically and monstrously wrong. 87. Israeli researchers gained access to years of parole hearing records and analyzed over 1,000 decisions made by experienced judges across many months of working days. Prisoners appearing before the board first thing in the morning were granted parole about 65% of the time. So prisoners whose cases were heard late in the afternoon before a scheduled break were granted parole less than 10% of the time, regardless of their crime, behavior, or rehabilitation progress. The single most important factor determining whether a prisoner went home or stayed locked up was not their file. It was how many decisions the judges had already made that day before opening the next folder. 88. Researchers in 1980 asked volunteers to quickly estimate Whether more common English words began with the letter R or had R sitting as the third letter in the word. Most volunteers confidently answered that far more words begin with R. The opposite is actually true by a significant margin. Words with R as the third letter vastly outnumber words starting with R in the English language. But your brain retrieves examples by their starting sounds, making words beginning with R flood into memory effortlessly, while third-position R words stay stubbornly hidden. Your brain convinced you of a false linguistic fact simply because of how its own filing system happens to be organized. 89. Two psychology professors named Jones and Nisbet presented volunteers with identical failure scenarios and asked them to explain what happened. When the failure belonged to the volunteer themselves, they consistently attributed it to bad luck, unfair circumstances, and external factors beyond their control. When the exact same failure scenario was attributed to another person, they consistently explained it as a reflection of that person's character, poor judgment, and personal inadequacy. Same failure, same facts. Completely opposite explanations depending solely on whose name was attached to the story. Your brain runs two entirely separate rulebooks for human behavior and applies them based exclusively on whether the human in question happens to be you. 90. A memory researcher handed volunteers a list of 15 random words and gave them 90 seconds to study it before taking it away. When asked to write down everything they remembered, volunteers consistently recalled the first few words from the beginning of the list and the last few words from the very end with impressive accuracy. Everything sitting in the middle of the list had largely evaporated. Hermann Ebbinghaus first documented this pattern, and researchers have replicated it thousands of times since. Your brain gives premium storage to whatever arrives first and whatever arrives last, and treats everything sandwiched in the middle as largely disposable background noise not worth the full memory budget. 91. Researchers handed young women Barbie dolls and asked them to handle and examine them for just a few minutes before completing an unrelated survey. Women who handled the Barbie dolls reported significantly lower body satisfaction and a stronger desire to be thinner than women who handled a neutral object for the same amount of time. A plastic toy with unrealistic proportions reshaped real women's perception of their own bodies within minutes. Mattel created a doll and accidentally built a body image destruction machine that fits in a child's backpack. 92. Onyx sleep researchers restricted volunteers to 6 hours of nightly sleep for 2 consecutive weeks and then tested their cognitive performance against people who had stayed completely awake for 24 hours straight. Both groups performed equally badly on every single test administered. The shocking part was that the sleep-restricted group consistently rated their own impairment as minimal and manageable throughout the entire 2 weeks, and they were performing like completely sleep-deprived zombies while simultaneously feeling totally fine about it. The less sleep you get, the less capable your brain becomes of accurately measuring exactly how badly sleep-deprived you actually are. 93. Researchers handed 2 groups of volunteers identical word lists to memorize. One list contained completely ordinary, forgettable sentences. The other contained bizarre, weird, and absurd sentences describing impossible situations involving familiar objects doing ridiculous things. When tested later, the bizarre sentence group recalled dramatically more items with significantly greater accuracy than the ordinary sentence group. Your brain is ruthlessly efficient and filters out anything it considers normal and predictable as unworthy of premium storage space. Weird information gets a luxury memory suite, while ordinary information gets quietly shown the exit before it even finishes arriving. 94. Researchers walked into university offices and gave random employees a coffee mug as a free gift. Minutes later, they offered to buy the mug back from those same employees. The employees demanded significantly more money to return the mug than outside volunteers were willing to pay to purchase the identical mug brand new. And the mug had been owned for less than 5 minutes. No emotional attachment had been built. Simply receiving an object and briefly holding it was enough for the brain to inflate its value dramatically and make surrendering it feel like an unreasonable and painful personal loss. 95. Volunteers were asked to close their eyes and vividly imagine a specific object, like a ripe tomato or a bright orange, in their mind as clearly as possible. While they were imagining, The researchers secretly projected an extremely faint image of that exact object onto a screen in front of them, barely visible to the naked eye. Volunteers consistently reported that their mental imagery felt unusually vivid and detailed that day. They believed their imagination was performing exceptionally well without realizing external images were quietly feeding their mental picture from outside. Their imagination was getting secretly assisted and taking full personal credit for the upgraded performance. 96. Neuroscientists slid volunteers into brain scanning machines and took detailed images of their neural activity while those volunteers experienced two different scenarios. In the first scenario, volunteers felt sharp physical pain from a mild electric shock to their hand. And in the second scenario, volunteers were told they had been rejected and excluded from a social group by other participants. The brain scans from both scenarios showed activation in the exact same regions, responsible for processing physical pain. Being left out of a group lunch or ignored in a text thread is not a metaphor for pain inside your brain. It is literally and neurologically identical to getting punched. 97. Sports analysts and NBA coaches spent decades believing passionately in the hot hand, the phenomenon where a player who scores several shots in a row becomes more likely to score the next one. Fans screamed for hot players to keep shooting. Coaches drew up plays around streaking scorers. Researchers then analyzed comprehensive statistical data covering thousands of consecutive NBA shots and found zero evidence that making previous shots increased the probability of making the next one whatsoever. Every shot is statistically independent. The hot hand is a story your brain tells itself because it finds random sequences deeply uncomfortable and immediately invents patterns to explain them away. 98. Researchers asked volunteers to recall a specific unethical thing they had personally done in the past and write about it in detail. Afterward, those same volunteers were offered a choice of free gifts to take home, including pencils, notepads, and hygiene products like soap and hand sanitizer. Volunteers who had just spent time writing about their own past moral failures chose the soap and antiseptic wipes at dramatically higher rates than volunteers who wrote about neutral memories. Moral guilt was generating a genuine physical desire to wash their hands clean. Your conscience apparently did not get the memo that soap does not actually remove bad decisions. 99. Volunteers in a 1989 study were read a long list of made-up names that sounded vaguely plausible but belonged to nobody famous or real. The next day, those same volunteers were shown a mixed list containing both the fictional names from yesterday and entirely new fictional names they had never encountered before. Volunteers consistently rated the names from the previous day as famous despite knowing they had been told no famous people were on the original list. Simply hearing a name once made it feel familiar, and their brain automatically upgraded familiarity directly into fame, without asking any further questions about whether that conclusion made any logical sense. 100. A Harvard psychologist named Robert Rosenthal walked into elementary schools and told teachers that specific students in their classes had been identified through special testing as academic late bloomers who were about to experience significant intellectual growth that school year. Those students had actually been chosen completely at random from class rosters. By the end of the year, those randomly selected students showed significantly greater measured IQ gains than their classmates. Teachers unconsciously gave them more attention, more encouragement, and more challenging material based on an expectation that was entirely fictional. Belief alone, with zero supporting evidence, produced measurable changes in real human intelligence, scores 101. Researchers analyzed every single combat sports result from the 2004 Athens Olympics, including boxing, wrestling, and taekwondo bouts where competitors were randomly assigned either red or blue uniforms before competing. Athletes wearing red won 55% of all bouts across every combat discipline analyzed. The margins were consistent enough that researchers concluded color alone was shifting competitive outcomes in a statistically significant way. Nobody changed their training. Nobody changed their technique. The only variable was uniform color. Your brain sees red on an opponent and begins making subtle psychological concessions before the first punch gets thrown. 102. A memory researcher handed volunteers a list of random words and gave them a short window to study the entire thing before testing their recall. Without exception, volunteers across hundreds of repeated trials remembered words from the beginning of the list and words from the very end with strong accuracy, while words buried in the middle essentially vanished from memory almost completely. Your brain allocates premium attention to whatever arrives first and whatever arrives last, and treats the middle section of nearly everything as largely skippable filler content. This is why every powerful speech, sales pitch, and first date in American history front-loads and backloads everything important. 103. Researchers gathered both complete wine novices and professionally certified wine experts and sat them all down for a blind taste test featuring both budget wines costing around $10 and premium bottles priced over $100. The novices performed exactly as expected and could not reliably distinguish between them at all. The certified experts performed only marginally better than pure random guessing, despite years of professional training and thousands of hours of dedicated tasting experience. Wine expertise that commands enormous professional salaries and generates tremendous personal confidence turned out to be substantially more fragile and unreliable under genuinely blind conditions than anyone in the wine industry wanted to publicly acknowledge. 104. Researchers showed volunteers a rapid series of photographs featuring people holding various everyday objects and asked them to quickly identify what the person in each photo was holding as fast as possible. When the photographed person held a gun, volunteers identified the object faster, but simultaneously made significantly more racially biased errors in their broader perception of the entire scene. A single prop changed how the brain processed every other piece of visual information appearing in the same image simultaneously. One object in a photograph rewired the brain's entire recognition and categorization process for everything else visible in that same frame, without the volunteer noticing any shift occurring. 105. Researchers presented identical job applications and personality profiles to volunteers, but manipulated one single variable across different versions of each application. Some applications featured names that were simple and easy to pronounce, while others featured names that required more cognitive effort to sound out correctly. Volunteers consistently rated the easy name candidates as more trustworthy, more likable, and more hireable than the difficult name candidates, despite every other detail being completely identical. Your brain experiences the minor mental effort of processing an unfamiliar name and misreads that cognitive friction as a vague feeling of suspicion directed at the person whose name caused the difficulty. 106. Our researchers took photographs of individual people and then placed those same individuals into group photos alongside several other people before asking separate volunteers to rate everyone's attractiveness. The exact same faces consistently received higher attractiveness ratings when viewed inside a group photograph than when viewed alone in an individual portrait, despite being literally identical images of the same people. Your brain looks at a group and automatically averages out the facial features of everyone present, and then generously applies that averaged boost back onto each individual member. Standing in a group photo with attractive friends is apparently a legitimate and neurologically documented strategy for appearing more attractive yourself. 107. The University of Kentucky researchers recruited volunteers and had half of them take acetaminophen daily for 3 weeks, while the other half took an identical-looking placebo pill. All volunteers then participated in a social rejection exercise where they were excluded from an online game by other players and asked to rate their emotional distress afterward. Volunteers who had been taking the acetaminophen reported significantly less emotional pain from the social rejection than the placebo group. A common over-the-counter physical painkiller measurably reduced the hurt of being left out because social rejection and physical injury share the exact same pain processing pathway running through your brain. 108. Black students at Stanford University were divided into 2 groups and given the exact same difficult standardized test under slightly different instructions. The first group was told the test measured actual intellectual ability and academic intelligence. The second group was told the test was simply a routine laboratory exercise with no evaluative meaning attached. The group told the test measured intelligence scored significantly lower than the group told it was meaningless, despite having identical academic backgrounds and preparation. The mere awareness that a negative stereotype about their group existed and might be confirmed by their performance consumed enough cognitive resources to measurably reduce their actual scores. Saw 109. Political scientist Philip Tetlock spent 20 years recruiting 284 professional experts, including economists, political analysts, intelligence officers, and seasoned journalists, and asked them to make specific and measurable predictions about future political and economic events. After tracking thousands of individual forecasts against actual outcomes, Tetlock discovered these credentialed experts performed only marginally better than random chance on average. More embarrassingly, the most famous, most frequently televised, and most confidently outspoken experts consistently produce the worst predictions of the entire group. See, professional expertise and media confidence turned out to be running in reliably opposite directions across 2 full decades of carefully tracked data. 110 Mar researchers photographed the same male model and digitally placed his image in front of backgrounds of different colors, before asking female volunteers to rate his attractiveness and desirability across 5 separate experiments conducted in different countries. The model received dramatically higher attractiveness and sexual desirability ratings when appearing in front of a red background compared to identical photographs where he appeared against white, blue, or gray backgrounds. No other variable changed between photos. The color sitting behind a person with zero physical connection to them was enough to make female brains consistently and significantly upgrade their entire evaluation of that person's appeal. 111. Saw researchers split volunteers into 2 groups and gave both groups identical vocabulary words to learn. The first group simply read each word and its definition repeatedly until time ran out. The second group was given partial clues and had to actively generate each word themselves by filling in missing letters and solving small puzzles before seeing the answer. When tested later, the group that generated the words themselves remembered dramatically more of them, with far greater accuracy than the group that had passively read the same words the same number of times. Your brain encodes information it actively produces at a profoundly deeper level than information it simply receives sitting quietly and doing nothing. So your brain just sat through 111 proofs that it has been lying to your face every single day of your entire life, and it probably still thinks it is doing a great job. You missed gorillas, felt fake hands, and walked slower because of word puzzles. Congratulations! You are beautifully and spectacularly fooled. Now drop a comment below telling us which experiment messed you up the most, because we are genuinely curious how broken everyone's brain is. Smash that like button, subscribe to Dumb History, and share this with someone whose brain needs humbling immediately. And if you think that was wild, the next video on your screen is about to destroy whatever confidence you have left.